Okay, guys, we got a big one today, a bomb, an explosion. If you are into Bitcoin, if you are into financial markets, if you are into currencies, gold, silver, you're going to like this episode. If you just want to know what are some potential differences between gold and Bitcoin, then you should listen to this podcast. So in this podcast, I talk about a discussion or debate between a guy named Peter Schiff and Anthony Pompliano. One is pro-Bitcoin, one is anti-Bitcoin. The first part of the show, I talk about some history about Peter Schiff and some of his ideas. He's anti-Bitcoin. Then I talk about what Schiff and Pompliano have to say about Bitcoin and whether Bitcoin, is it money? Is it currency? What's the difference? So take a listen. By the way, you can follow me on YouTube at Taylor Stutch, Taylor space Stutch, Stuch. Follow me at my website, tstutch.com, tstuch.com. Twitter, tstutch1, tstuch, the number 1. Email me questions and commentary at tayradio1@gmail.com. That's tayradio1@gmail.com. And enjoy the episode. Okay, guys, let's get into it. Let's take a deep dive into the annals. The annals? I don't know. Into the quote-unquote debate. It was definitely much more of a discussion between Anthony Pompliano and Peter Schiff. So to give a little bit more of a backstory here, Anthony Pompliano is very, very pro-Bitcoin. He is a big proponent of Bitcoin. He's on Twitter under the name of Pomp. I think that's his handle, Pomp, Pomp. And then Peter Schiff. And he is, I think if you just type in Peter Schiff, you can find him. So they go back and forth because on Twitter, Peter Schiff and him and Pompliano have it's a really fun adversarial relationship on Twitter. So Pompliano will post something that's very pro-Bitcoin, very bullish, and then Peter will comment underneath it about how it's bullshit, and then Anthony will call him out, and then he'll call Anthony out, and it's actually really fun to watch. I really enjoy their Twitter back and forths. So Anthony Pompliano is very pro-Bitcoin. Peter Schiff is not pro-Bitcoin. In fact, he is bearish on Bitcoin. However, Peter is bearish on a lot of stuff. Now, before we get into it, I actually don't have a lot of background on Anthony, but he hosted Peter. So we'll talk a little bit about Peter, and we'll talk a little bit about Peter's views on Bitcoin. So a little background on Peter Schiff. First off, I have been following Peter Schiff since about 2012, 2011, and it was when I was a sophomore in college and I was studying economics, and I realized that I was not learning the truth about economics. So I looked online to find people like Nassim Taleb, I found Peter Schiff, and I found other people as well. Oh yeah, Mark Faber, and so those were some big influences in my mid to late college years. So a little background of Peter. He started off his career in options. He was a broker. He worked at Lehman Brothers, and he said while he was there, he did not like management. He did not like how management was focused on making money for the firm and not necessarily for the clients. So he was encouraged to do things like probably how many people are. It's basically how can you get the most fees out of your clients is how he described it. It was about getting fees from your clients, not necessarily about doing the best work for your clients. However, from the beginning, he was focused on buying commodities. Like he said, gold, oil, utilities. He had been focused on that for a long time. And he also had lots of money in foreign stocks. So whenever he quit Lehman Brothers and started doing his own thing, because he actually bought a company and then turned it into Euro Pacific Capital, which is the company that he runs and manages. He has a couple companies actually. So he has always been focused on, or generally speaking, he's always been focused on commodities like oil, gold, silver, utilities, things like that. You know, utilities like your electricity and stuff of that nature. He's also made some money in foreign stocks. So during some of the more bust periods in the U.S., he made money overseas in foreign stocks, and that's also one reason why he named his company Euro Pacific Capital, to give it more of an international feel. He had exposure to European stocks and some other stocks. So a little bit more about Peter. He he saw two crashes. One he saw in the dot-com bubble. The other he saw the housing bust. So he said that during the dot-com crash, he was warning people for a long time before the bubble burst not to invest in a lot of the dot-coms. So you might say, well, why? How did he see that? So Pomp asked him, what did Peter Schiff see during the dot-com days? And he said Peter Schiff looked at a company like Yahoo. And he said that Yahoo at the time was worth more than every company in New Zealand. And he thought that that sounded insane. So he thought that it was way overvalued. Now, I have to stop there for a second. That is a really interesting way of looking at the market. Who would have thought to say, oh, this company is worth more than all the companies in this small country combined, and I don't buy it. I don't believe that to be true. So one other reason why he didn't believe it is because a lot of these companies that were highly valued were not making any money. And so that was a really big problem. Actually, we've seen that with some other companies too. And we see that with companies nowadays, like with Uber. Uber had a big IPO, and the question is, well, how much money really can it make? And that's it's actually going on in our current market. There's a lot of companies that are raising money, raising capital, but the question is, can they make money on their own? He said he saw a bubble, and basically he just used these kind of heuristics, right? I would say that's a heuristic, kind of a rule of thumb. Like, hey, if this company is worth more than all the companies of this country combined, there's probably something wrong here. Now, that's not always going to apply because some countries are just not going to have very productive companies. But now, how did he see the real estate bubble? So aside from the fact that he saw, as the prices of real estate going up so high and fast, he said that a big reason for him was that he was in the thick of it. So he saw how people were making subprime loans. He said he saw loan applications, and that was he said that the fact that he saw some of these loan applications and stuff was pretty troubling. And so when he saw those, he knew that there was a problem. Now, what was another sign that he saw? He also said that at the time he was paying very close attention to central bank policy, and he knew what the central banks were doing. So he saw that the central banks during the housing boom, he saw that they were, how interest rates were and how the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world were inflating their currencies. They were printing lots of money. So he saw that there was a problem in the economy, and he believed that the prices of houses were vastly inflated. And he actually went on to many networks, many news shows, and talked about this for a while. And after talking about it for a while, his prediction turned out to be correct. So he was predicting a huge decline in housing prices, a huge economic recession, financial crisis. So these were, he predicted this. And I actually saw, this is one of the big things that turned me on to Peter Schiff, because when I was studying economics, and I've mentioned this before, none of the academic economists that we all learn about in university and all this, none of them saw the crisis coming. But somebody like Peter Schiff did. And he looked at things like central bank policy and just looking at regular signs in the economy, looking at the data, looking at what people were doing, how it could cause a problem. And so he was like, look, asset prices are heavily inflated for housing, and it's going to come crashing down. And so he was correct on that. Now, sometime during the conversation, Pomp asks Peter if he is a perma bear. So Peter has been very bearish on the market for a long time. So he was bearish during the dot-com phase. He was bearish during the housing crisis. And he's been bearish on the stock market because I've been listening to him on and off. He's been bearish on the stock market since about 2012. He's been calling for a collapse. Now, that being said, he was almost correct. We almost had another banking crisis back in 2012. I think it was Bank of America almost went under. And then I think somebody stepped in, but it was 2012 was actually not a really good time for some banks. So he was bearish during .com because he thought because he looked at, he looked at some of the dynamics. Companies weren't making money. The Fed was increasing the money supply, things like that. He's also said, though, he's not bearish everywhere. He's bearish in certain areas. So he made a good point that he's been bullish in things like the overseas stock markets. He's been bullish in some commodities like gold. So he's not a perma bear in the sense that he thinks everything's going down, but he's been more bearish on the U.S. economy and the U.S. stock market, even though the U.S. stock market has been doing very well. So he also believes there's going to be a big sovereign debt crisis. Maybe we can talk about that at another time. But after this break from our sponsors, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and gold. Let's talk about that. All right. So, like I've said before, Pompliano is very pro Bitcoin, but Peter is not. So what is going on here? Peter, let's see here. I've got some notes here, so checking what I got. Okay, so one of the biggest takeaways that I have from the debate between them about gold and Bitcoin is the use case for Bitcoin. So he points out, hold on a second. Sorry, had a dog bark in there. So Peter points out that Bitcoin has no store of value. That was the one thing that I thought was really interesting. I had not really looked at it that way. So Bitcoin does have some very good qualities to it. But he made a good point. Peter says that gold can still be valuable for other uses. It can be used in industry. It can be used for jewelry. It can be used for art. It doesn't degrade over time. One thing that I like to point out as well, separately, is that if the power goes out, because I always say that, one of my biggest problems with Bitcoin is, if there's if there's an event where, the power goes out, you can't use Bitcoin, right? But you could use currency, you could use physical money and currency, but you can't use Bitcoin. But regardless, Peter pointed out correctly, I believe, that Bitcoin can only be used for trading. You cannot use Bitcoin for anything else. So it doesn't really hold its value outside of just exchanging for one thing or another. It doesn't have an inherent value like, say, cigarettes or maybe seashells would for decoration or beauty. Cattle you could use for cattle could be used for, what is it? Cattle is used for, oh yeah, of course. Cattle can be used for 100,000 different things, right? You can eat it. You can use it to do work. Whatever the different types of cattle was used for currency or money. And what Peter makes a difference is that there's a difference between money and currency. This was interesting. This is something worth looking into more. Basically, he was saying is that the gold is money, the dollar is currency. Currency is a substitute. According to Peter, currency is just a substitute for money. So you could have anything be currency. You could, use any kind of paper or digital whatever for currency. But what makes money is something that has a store of value as well. It fulfills everything and has a store of value. There's something inherently valuable about the commodity itself. And that is something that Bitcoin really lacks. And Peter makes a point that Bitcoin is not a commodity. Even though it's classified as a commodity for, tax purposes and stuff like that, he says it's not a true commodity because there is no value for it. Like, oil is a commodity. Oil could be used as money. Like I said, oil, silver, gold, other types of products could be used as commodities because they have some kind of inherent value themselves. But and those can also be used as money. Those are commodities as well. But Bitcoin cannot be used as a commodity. Like if you have 1 million Bitcoin, there's absolutely nothing you can do with the Bitcoin except buy other things with them. It's just like US dollars, right? There's nothing you can do with US dollars except for buy other shit. US dollars have no inherent value. They have no inherent worth, not like silver or copper or nickel or palladium. It's only a substitute for these other real commodities or these other commodities that could be considered actual money. So that was the biggest takeaway I got from this, was that Peter made a really good distinction that money, to really have it be money in the economy that has true value, it cannot just be backed purely by trust and confidence. There has to be some inherent value in it, along with the trust and the confidence that people use it for as a medium, as an exchange, and it's easily tradable, things like that we all have learned about what money is. So, another really good point about Bitcoin being used as money, and this isn't really a huge detractor, but it does make sense in the short term. So Peter made a good point that in the short term, Bitcoin it's not a good use for money. One, because it has no inherent value to it, except for being tradable. But aside from that, the volatility is nice, right? It's nice that it has volatility. However, the fact that it has such volatility does make it more difficult for it to become a real source of currency as well as money. So it could be used as currency, but one of the biggest problems with it right now is it is so volatile. So how are you going to trade using something that is so volatile? Sorry about that. That was a sneeze. That was a little puss sneeze. So as basically the way I'm looking at it is it's a digital currency. And what Peter Schiff talked about was if you want to have a real digital currency that can be used more like money, if you wanted to make a real digital currency that was closer to the way the systems, like a sound digital currency, in addition to it being scarce, it would need to be backed by something like a physical commodity, like something physically usable, like gold, silver, copper, nickel, oil, something like that. So, super interesting. I really liked the way that Peter laid this out. Before this debate or this discussion, I did not think I thought that Peter actually was wrong about Bitcoin, but I actually think he's right. I think that he's looking at it correct, that it is a currency and that it, may not survive. But he did concede there are some really good things about Bitcoin. One of the good things about Bitcoin is the fact that it's scarce. So Pomp liked to point this out. So it is scarce. There's a limited amount of Bitcoin that can ever be created. And it is therefore, there is some amount of trust that people can put into it. So if you had to look at competing currencies and you looked at something like the US dollar or the euro, the RMB, or the Bitcoin, the good thing about Bitcoin is that even though it's not backed by anything either except trust, it is also limited in supply. And the fact that it's limited in supply gives it a leg up against other currencies, in my opinion. It can't be printed from nowhere forever. The other really good thing about it is it's safe and not censorable. So governments cannot confiscate your Bitcoin unless they know your Bitcoin password, which resides in your head. Now, they can make it difficult for people to use Bitcoins, but he made a really good point that, Pomp made a really good point that Bitcoin, cannot be just taken from people like maybe gold can or other types of currency. If you can't get your dollars out of the bank, but you can, if you have your Bitcoin in cold storage or some other kind of method, then it cannot be easily taken from you, or it cannot be taken from you without the knowledge of your password. So Pomp also asked Peter, what did he think about the possible price of Bitcoin? So Peter looks at Bitcoin like a speculative commodity. He believes that it is he looks at it like it could be digital fiat, basically, and it could go much higher. He also conceded that he wishes he would have bought Bitcoin when it was cheaper. He says basically in the end, he believes that Bitcoin will go to zero. However, he doesn't know when that will be, but he does believe it will go to zero. But he also concedes that it could go to 20,000. It could go higher than 20,000. He just doesn't look at it as sound money. So I think that's really interesting. So hold on. We're going to go to the next segment, and I'm going to wrap this up for you. Okay, so if you've listened this far, you already know what's going on. But essentially, this discussion, I really thought it was awesome, has changed my perspective on Bitcoin. I now look at Bitcoin more as a pure digital fiat with limited supply, which is cool. I still look at gold as the ultimate. I look at gold as more of the ultimate go-to for money. Gold and silver, things like that. And I will, after listening to this discussion, I will continue to believe that to be the case. One thing I really liked about Peter is, so I've been following him for a while, but I have not been listening to him lately because his predictions are so wrong. So let's talk about his predictions. The thing about Peter is I think that his outcomes are going to be correct in several ways. But one of the biggest problems I find is he's gotten out there so heavily talking about the imminent crash of this and everything else that he has lost credibility in his prediction abilities. So the biggest problem is he's been trying to time the when things are going to happen. And if you read enough Nassim Taleb, you would know one of the biggest issues is his models are really good. I think that his a mental model, mathematical models, whatever his models are that he's going off of, are good models, except that he doesn't have enough information. He talked about how one of the things that he underestimated about the stock market after the financial crisis was he didn't expect the Fed to print so much money. He didn't expect the Fed to keep interest rates low for so long. And those are the kinds of exogenous variables or outside variables that are, I don't know if they're truly exogenous, but they're variables that he did not account for. And that, in my opinion, is what you learn when you are studying someone like Nassim Taleb and the Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, is somebody like Peter Schiff could have it all right. Like, I think he has most of it correct in terms of, I believe that his understanding of economics is really fundamentally sound. I think that in the end, he's correct that the dollar will have a crisis, all of these things. But his timing and some of his points, I think, are way off because he hasn't taken into account all the variables, which has made his predictions sound like bullshit. So he is, in my opinion, he's lost credibility in that realm. However, I do believe his idea of what sound money is, I think that is correct. I think gold is sound. I like Bitcoin personally. I will continue to buy Bitcoin in small amounts because I do look at it as a potential competing currency with things like the dollar, the euro, things like that. And I think it could hold its value. I think it will hold its value, not inherently, but I think it will hold its value based off of the trust of individuals. I think it will hold its value against other currencies in a time of crisis. Peter thinks that it will be a competition between gold and Bitcoin. I think that gold and Bitcoin both will be used for exits when if the financial system has another crisis. I could see gold I could see it being like gold, silver, Bitcoin, all of those things going up if people flee out of other currencies. Now, of course, I'm not an expert, but this is what I got from the discussion. There's also a lot more in the discussion that we can talk about at a later time. And anyway, it's a really good discussion. Check out you can check it out on YouTube. I think it's called the Off the Chain Podcast with Anthony Pompliano. And thank you guys for listening. You can follow me at my website, tstuch.com. That's tstuch.com. You can follow me on Twitter, tstuch1. Email me at tayradio1@gmail.com. You can follow me on... where else? I think that's it for now. You can follow my Periscope broadcasts at tstuch1 as well.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.